this in case anybody else has questions about it. Let's see. So let's first talk about the syntax for a second for the different loops. So let's say that we just want to print something out. We're going to print out the numbers from 1 through 10. So I'm going to do for int I equals 1, I is less than 11, I plus plus. And I'm going to do system.out.print I plus a space. So let's do that, and then we'll do just an empty line. So we've got the numbers 1 through 10 printed out there, right?
Right.
And we did that by using a for loop. We start with the number 1. We're going to continue as long as I is less than 11. We're going to add 1 each time, print out the value of I plus a space. Boom, there's all the things. So if we want to do this with a while loop, we need to have a loop control variable initialized first outside of the loop. And then we'd say while I is less than 11, and we do system.out.print I plus that, and then we do I plus plus, and we do another print statement down here, and we run it. So we've got the same thing going on here, right? And then space this out. So then we did the same thing with a do while loop. We reset I to 1, and then we do, and we do while I is. So let me just think about this for 1 sec. So we're gonna, it should be the same. And then when we enter the loop, we'll do system.out.print I plus that. And then, so the first time it'll print 1. And then I'll do, so let me see if that works. So we'll get another print statement here. May have to adjust, but let me just look real quick. Oh, wait, what? Error exists. Oh, what's my error? Oh, sorry. Well, I need to have this. Oh, sorry. So there we go. So now we've got, let me make this a little bit bigger so we can see all 3 of them at the same time. So we have our for loop, we have our while loop, we have our do while loop. So all 3 of these can do the exact same thing. In this case, print the numbers from 1 through 10. So to solve the problem, to do the thing we want to do, functionally, all 3 of these loops work, right? But the best choice for this would be the for loop. And the reason is that the for loop, the syntax is constructed for precisely something like this. And the reason I say that is because we know how many times we want this loop to occur. We want it to iterate 10 times. And when you know exactly how many times you want something to iterate, the for loop is usually the best choice. And the reason for that is because it includes these 3 pieces in the first line of the for loop, You have the initialization expression. That's where you initialize the loop control variable to a value. You have the test condition. That's where you test to see if you go back into the loop. And you have the iteration expression, which is where you change the value of the loop control variable. How you change it is up to you, but you do you change the value. Because if you don't change this value, then this is never going to be false, and you're going to have an infinite loop. And so you can define this very easily by providing a value here and here to provide a precise number of times that this is going to loop. And so that's why this is the best choice in this situation. Now, again, you can do it with a while loop. You can do it with a do while loop. But it's not the best choice because you have to have the loop control variable declared and initialized before you even get into the loop. You have to have the iteration expression inside the body of the loop. So syntactically and for clarity purposes, it's easier to see everything right here. It's all on line 6. You just look at that and you know you can determine exactly how many times this loop is going to iterate. Now, these other loops are better for other reasons. So for example, let's say that you wanted to read input from a file. Well, you have no idea when you start how many things are in the file. Let's say you're reading one line at a time. Well, you don't know how many lines are in that file. So therefore, a for loop is not a good choice. The while loop is a good choice in that situation. And so like the scanner class, for example, let's see here. So the scanner class has a method in it. Oops, that's not what I'm looking for. Yeah, has next, which is going to return a Boolean that will tell you, is there another input in this file? Is there another thing to get in this file? So you could create a scanner object from a file, and you could say, like, if you call it input, let's call our object file input. So you say while file input dot has next, then you go back into the loop, you read the next line, and you do process that next line of text or whatever it is in the file, and then you go back up and you check again, does it have another line? If so, you go back into the loop and you loop again, and you keep going until there are no more lines in the file, and then your while loop will then be false and you'll be done. And so that's very helpful, for this type of thing. Let's say you're getting input from a user, you're having them try to guess a number. So let's say, for example, let me write something real quick here. So let's go with, let's import our scanner. And let's create a scanner object. Oops, didn't mean to do that. And so let's say that we want the user to guess which number from 1 to 10. So we're gonna say int correct number equals 7, and then we're gonna say so I'm gonna do a do while loop in this case. So I'm gonna say, whoops, int guess, and I'm gonna say do while so then I'm going to say, please enter your guess from 1 to 10. And then we're going to go, oops. And I'm going to say guess equals input dot next int. All right, so we've got a scanner. We've got our correct number is 7. We've got a variable called guess. And we're going to ask the user to enter a guess from 1 to 10. We're going to get the number that they guessed. And then we're going to say, while guess does not equal correct number. So if they guess something and it doesn't equal the number we're looking for, then we go back up in here. We ask them to enter another guess. And we get their guess and we check it again. Once this is correct, we do system.print yes. And then I'll say, whoops. All right, so let's go. We say, please enter your guess from 1 to 10. I'll say 2. So this, we'll say 3. And I'll say 8. And then when I say 7, yes, 7 is the correct number. Thanks for playing. So you see how in that case, a for loop wouldn't work because we have no idea how many guesses it's going to take for this person to guess the correct number. So if we set up a for loop, how many times will we set the for loop up for?
I guess you wouldn't know, so you couldn't do that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you don't know, you have no way of knowing because a person could keep guessing. I mean, they could guess right on the first time, or they could take 10 guesses, or they could take more than that because they might guess the same number they already guessed. So it's really unknown how many times we need to run this loop before they're going to guess the correct number. And so we don't base our loop number of iterations on any specific number. Instead, we base them on this Boolean expression that as long as the number they guessed is not the right number, go ahead and loop again. Now, you could do this same thing with a while loop, but the thing that makes the do while loop better suited to this situation is that you would have to do something called priming the pump if you did this in a while loop. Because, so let's see what happens if we do this in a while loop. So I'm going to do down here, and I'm going to say, well, in order for me to do a while loop, so while guess does not equal correct number, so that's what I'm going to loop, right? And I'm going to say, I'm going to get these 2 lines of code here. I'm going to use those again. So that's my while loop. But the problem is the first time I approach this loop, if this didn't exist, right? Let's say this didn't exist. Let's comment that out. So the first time that I approach this loop, guess has no value. We haven't given it a value yet. So I've got to prime the pump by first asking the user to enter this the first time, and then if it's correct, I never go into the loop. So let's see what happens. So if I'm going to do another statement here. Just for debugging purposes. So let's say I go here and I say 3, and it says, hi, I'm in the loop, please enter a guess. And then I go 7, because yes, 7 is the correct number. So let's run it again, and this time I'm going to say 7 the first time, and notice I never went into the loop at all. Because a while loop can run 0 or more times. It is possible that when you approach a while loop, that this test is false when the first time you approach it and you never enter that loop. A do while loop has to run at least one time. So a do while loop runs 1 or more times, and it makes it perfect for something like this because we do not have to prime the pump. Because we're definitely going to go into our do while loop one time, we can put this statement in here, and we don't have to put it outside of the loop because we're not testing it until after the body of the loop is run. But you see how they both are suited. While loop and do while loop are both suited for loops where we don't know how many times they're going to run. But the advantage that the do while loop has is if you're getting some input from the user or from a file or something like that, you have this ability to get the information before the first time you test something. And so in this case, the do while loop is much more useful. I will say that in practice, for loops and while loops are probably used more often. The do while loop has, some specific things it's good at, but typically you'll see while loops in code more than you'll see do while loops. But it does have its uses, and this is an example of a good use for it. So where the for loop is going to come in really handy is in the array chapter. When we get to arrays, for loops are built for arrays.
So with the while loop in this case, basically you're just saying you have to have repeated code, versus in the do while loop we didn't have to repeat our input.nextInt.
Yeah, the problem is because the while loop has the test at the beginning, it's a pre-test loop, whereas the do while loop is a post-test loop. Because the while loop is pre-test, it's going to test your condition before it can ever go into the body. And so your condition has to be able to be tested. And so in this case, our condition was we were testing the value of guess, but we didn't have a value for guess until we did this. And so we had to get an initial value for guess, and then if we needed more values because it was not matching, then we'd have to get another value for guess. Whereas in the do while loop, you don't test until after the loop body runs, so it's post-test. So that means you enter in, you do this and get a value, then test and decide if you have to go back in. But you're going to at least get one guess value from the user. And so because do while loops run 1 or more times, they're guaranteed to run 1 time. Because of that, it's a perfect loop for when you have to get the body.
And also in the do while loop, I notice the only code that you have in the while part of the do while loop is just the conditional statement, right?
Yes, the while on a do while is just what are we testing for.
Okay.
Does that help clarify?
It does. Now, no matter what, eventually the code after the do while loop would execute because eventually they'd get it right, so it'd move on. But what's the question I'm trying to ask? How would you write a code like that? You said you could use any of the loops for anything, but also you said a for loop you couldn't do it because you wouldn't know the number of times.
Right. So So yes, you would be able to use the for loop for this, but it would be a very non-standard way of using the for loop because the for loop it basically would look like this right here. Let me see. Hold on one second. Let me think about this. Yeah, it would look like this loop. So I'm going to do this down here, copy this, paste this, and I'm going to say for, and then I'm going to do a thing here, I'm going to do a thing here, and I'll put this in front here. So the for loop, you can actually run it. One sec, give me just one sec. Delete this. Sorry, I had to download and delete that file. I'll edit it and put it in the regular section of the class. I'll just upload it as a video after I delete that part off the end of it. So a for loop, even though it has three parts to it, typically, right? A regular for loop, we'll just put one down here. A regular for loop looks like this in I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus, and then you have the body, right? So you have three elements of a for loop separated by semicolons. But all three of those elements are optional. You do not have to put any of them there. The semicolons are required. So in the worst case scenario, if I just wanted to do an infinite loop, that is a legal Java for loop right there. Just a for with two semicolons in it. Because what comes before the first one, before the second one, and after the second one, those three things are optional. This would just be an infinite loop. It's just going to run forever. But it is legal. And so in this case, we could technically build it just like we built the while loop. It's just there would be nothing before the first semicolon and nothing after the second semicolon. So functionally, it works the exact same way as a while, but it's a for loop. So yeah, that's what I meant when I said technically you can use any of them pretty much to solve any problem. You just have to, finagle your code around to do it. It's definitely not the best choice. Like I said, the best choice for this particular problem is the do while loop. Just like earlier, the best choice for the other problem was the for loop. So that's what I mean. Does that help?
It does. I was trying to think of a question I had. How would the code look? Do you know, like, in real world applications where you may put a password into somewhere and then it'll return and say invalid password, but in our case, it's always going to return that statement, just please enter your guess. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right. So in that case, that would probably be a better situation for the while loop. So you could say, like, please enter your password, get the password, and then when the password's not correct, then inside of the loop, let me get rid of this thing just for our debugging there. Inside the loop, instead of just saying, please enter your guess, you'd say, you entered the incorrect password, please try again, and then you get the next one. So in that particular example, the while loop is a better choice because you're going to do two different statements in that case. If you're asking the same thing every time, do while loops better. But if your first question is different from your subsequent questions, then the while loop becomes a better choice.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And also, is there a reason that in the do while loop on the while part you use a semicolon after the parameter?
It's a statement. It has to have an end to it.
Okay.
Yeah, it would just give you a syntax error if you didn't. It would say, say syntax error on token parentheses, a semicolon is expected after this.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's just this right here is a Java statement and needs a semicolon at the end of it.
Okay. Yeah, it just looks weird because, you know, like,
Right, because the while loop doesn't have it, right?
mm-hmm.
But the while loop, what that is that's the start of a block of code that's designated here. So the semicolon, the statement is actually here on line 18 and line 19. So like, for example, let's just say you had a while loop, just a infinite loop here, while true, and you didn't let me double check here. Let's see if that's required. Oh, unreachable code. Sorry, let me get rid of this infinite loop here. So you see how there's no curly braces here?
Right.
On loops, just like on if statements, the curly braces are not required. I recommend using them every time, but they're not required if you only have one line of code in your loop. And so they are required if you have more than one line of code, because if you didn't have them, it would only treat this as part of the loop, and this next line would not be part of the loop. Like if I took these out right here, now only line 26 is part of the loop. The indentation doesn't matter. The compiler ignores that. And so just this is the loop if I take the brackets out. But with them in, now both of these lines are part of the body. And so I can write a loop like this without the brackets if I just have one line of code. And so the reason I don't have to have a semicolon on this line is because the statement is actually this whole thing, right? Like this is actually the statement right here in this case. And so when I have the curly braces, the body of the loop is designated by the curly braces, and the statements are in here. So that's just, and you saw the same thing when you were doing the if statements. There's no semicolon after if parentheses some condition. You can put a curly brace, but there's no semicolon after that because that's not the line of code. That's the intro of a block of code. It's kind of like this right here, right? Your method. You have a main method, no semicolon on that line because it's a method definition. It's opening up a block of code.
Okay. And out of curiosity, could you explain, I know in our summit this week, we got a couple of examples that basically have a while and a do while, but they have an if statement within it. How do those if statements work when you include them in a loop?
It's just like anything else. Just whatever's in the body is going to execute. If there's an if statement, then the body of the if is only going to execute if the if statement's true, but it'll execute every time you loop back through the loop.
Okay.
So yeah, it just functions like any other time you have an if statement. It's just simply that you will return to it every time you go back into the loop.
Right. I think that's all the questions I had for tonight.
Okay.